have a bill introduction. It's RS 2866, and this is to clarify some language that was in the budget bill and also in regards to House Bill 2022, which we passed last year, regarding the two funds that was with the abandoned well funds with the KCC. We need to have just a technical amendment to clarify that. So I'm going to introduce that bill. Is there a second? Second by Representative Carlin. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Bill is introduced. Any further bill introductions? All right, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move on to the major item on the agenda, and that is an update from the Department of Children and Families, and we're going to be talking about Families First and the foster care. So I would invite the Deputy Secretary, Tanya Keys, to the podium. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Wardmaster. How is everybody? Thanks for having me here today. We do have a couple of topics for you, and I understand we do have a couple more copies of the testimony coming, so thank you for your patience. But we're here today about a foster care overview and then a little bit of information about Family First. Wanted to start with how it's going in Kansas, the need for foster care. This month was about 6,574 children. That's a reduction of about 13% in the past couple of years, or a reduction of almost 1,000 children in terms of the need for foster care. Wanted to give some structural information. Only law enforcement or the court have the authority to remove a child from a parent's custody. SRS does not have, or pardon me, DCF does not have that authority to remove children. In our body of work, we have an assessment, and we complete that assessment. We may offer prevention services or community-based services. In completing that work, if we have a concern about that the child cannot safely remain in the home, we do have a team decision-making meeting with the family and their network and any service providers that might be alongside that family. Sometimes the safest decision for a child is to enter foster care. When that happens, then the department does an application for a petition or approaches a district attorney or a county attorney to request consideration for that child to be placed in the protective custody of the secretary or temporary custody of the secretary. So that's structurally how a child enters foster care. Wanted to, on slide 5, talk a little bit about, so on how we're doing on the numbers of children entering care. In state fiscal year 21, there were about 3,000 children who entered care, and that is a reduction from the past 2 years. We've been able to impact that and reduce the need to enter foster care through some prevention work that we're doing that you'll hear about in a few minutes. Wanted to highlight a few of the reasons for removal into foster care. About 3/4 of children enter foster care for reasons of abuse or neglect. But there's another, about 24%, a quarter of children who enter foster care for reasons that aren't related to abuse or neglect. They might be related to a parent feeling overwhelmed, unable to cope and manage with resources. Might be a child or youth's behavior problems. And another reason that isn't categorically abuse or neglect also might be truancy. So that's the mix of reasons that children might enter care. The most frequent reason, about 1/3 of children enter care for reason of neglect. And so that could incorporate lack of supervision, physical neglect, medical neglect, educational neglect, but categorically neglect is the greatest reason why children enter care. In terms of age groups, the largest age group of children who enter care is 0 to 4, so preschoolers are entering care. And kind of an interesting note, of those youth who start or enter foster care at age 15 or older, the majority reason that older youth are entering care is child behavior problem or ways that we can help manage those behaviors. A little bit more in terms of the numbers. We mentioned that about 3,000 children entered care in state fiscal year 21, but the good news is about 3,300 children ended foster care. They left the system. So when you have more children exiting care than coming into care, that impacts your total need for foster care, which we mentioned has decreased about 13% in the past couple of years. The majority of children end foster care for a reason of reunification. They're returning home, about 52%. There are about 27% of children when they end foster care, it's for reason of adoption. And you've got some figures in front of you in terms of finalized adoptions. We've averaged 1,000 adoptions over the past 3 years. I'm on slide 9, a little bit about the court process in context for foster care. So when a child enters care, there's a temporary custody hearing within 72 hours. There's then an adjudication hearing that needs to happen within 60 days, and then future hearings occur. There's a disposition hearing, and then the child continues into care. There are permanency hearings at least every 12 months thereafter. So that gives you a little bit of context of the court process. The foster care case management service delivery is provided by 4 grantees through DCF. And those are KVC, Cornerstones of Care, TFI, and St. Francis Ministries, and they are across 8 catchment areas across the state, and you've got a map there on slide 11 of what their service areas incorporate. Their body of work addresses case planning, and they work with courts in terms of their service delivery. And I've mentioned a couple of the case planning goals. So when children enter care, they might have a goal of reunification, adoption, guardianship, living with another relative, or they also might have an alternate plan if they're an older youth and don't have a permanency goal of adoption or reunification. On slide 13, a little bit more information about the service array that might be provided through those case management agencies, such as they complete the screenings and assessments, they work with managed care organizations, they help coordinate and make decisions around placement changes, they do parent skill building, those services and supports that are needed to attend to that case plan goal. When children are removed into care, our priority is to place them with a relative or someone they know. There are a variety of different placements options for children. For example, relative placement, a family foster home, or group care. Those might be the placements. I was looking at some December data, and about 48% of children are in a licensed family foster home in December, and 37% were living with a relative. So that was what was happening in December. And you've got on slide 15 a little bit of information about last year. One of our more recent goals is we hope to have 50% of children placed with either a relative or kin, someone that they know and that their family might have a close connection with. So our goal is 50%. In December, we were at 45% statewide. 45% of children who are in care are living with a relative or kin, someone that their family has a close emotional tie to. We mentioned that about 48% of children are living in a licensed family foster home. You have a map on slide 16 of the distribution of where those licensed family foster homes are located. We always need more family foster homes and licensed homes. Some of the needs we have might be for older youth or children or youth that have a higher acuity or maybe some medical needs. We work with Children's Alliance of Kansas and about 19 child placing agencies across the state to help us recruit and retrain those family foster homes. Some of the pieces quickly that we're doing to increase our array or our levels of care, we are talking with our providers and neighbors in Missouri and Oklahoma around a level of care that could be a therapeutic foster home. What would that training look like? What would an appropriate rate structure be? So we'd like to increase our level of care to have therapeutic or sometimes called treatment foster homes. There's a level of care in Missouri called a professional foster home. So to fill some of these gaps we have, whether it's based on children or youth that might have greater behavioral health needs, we want to find the right fit and increase our array to have that so we can make sure we have the right resources for all youth in care and that we can reduce reliance on group care as well. In terms of, I'm on slide 19, in terms of overall performance management approach, we do have some strategies of quality assurance. Many of them are come to us through some federal requirements, but our quality assurance, we have 15 aggregate data requirements. We also use monthly management reports. There are quarterly case reviews that use a federal instrument and also look at some best practices. So we have those tools. We implement performance improvement plans with regard to the outcomes or processes when they're not being met. And those are developed regionally alongside our staff. They identify agreed upon goals that they want to reach in those performance improvement plans. We do have a penalty schedule that's applied at the end of a fiscal year if those agreed upon goals aren't met. We also implemented in this grant structure an incentive schedule for when outcomes are met. A little bit of data for you on slide 20. That is some of the key performance trends. Children in Kansas are safe in foster care. When we look at that federal performance, we are below, and which is good. We're meeting the federal standard for safety in foster care. Kansas has challenges with timely permanency. Specifically timely permanency for children who've been in care for 12 months. That's a federal measure that's looked at. We hope that 40.6% of children who've been in care, who've been removed into care in the past 12 months, meet permanency timely, and we're not where we need to be. Most recently, we were at 31%. We want to be at 40%. So we're working, I'll talk in a minute about a few judicial districts and counties that we're working with to really help us improve that. Placement stability has improved for children in Kansas. The goal is a rate of moves of 4.4 or fewer over 1,000 days. That's how it's measured in terms of the federal indicator. You want to be at 4.4 or fewer. We recently have been as low as 5.4. I think last month we were at 6.0. That is down from 9.5 a couple of years ago. So we are definitely getting better and have implemented some practices. Diving into what I mentioned about the greatest challenge of timely permanency in terms of outcomes on slide 21, we know that the 4 largest counties in Kansas are not meeting this performance standard. When you aggregate the other 101 counties, we're in pretty good shape in Kansas, but those 4 judicial districts are not meeting it. So we're working with Office of Judicial Administration, drilling down into some of that data so that we can understand. What we know is that, so this is a measure that looks at timely permanency in the 12th month. It's a mathematical, it looks for 12 month. Well, what we know from looking at the data is that there are children who reach their permanency in month 13 or month 14. So they may be just missing it by a week, right, when it counts a month. So again, just to say we're diving into it to see what could really help improve with the performance. And you've got a little bit of the performance trend on the placement stability there on slide 22. Wanted to take a moment to talk about a couple of special populations within foster care that I know are important to families and important to everybody. Children missing from placement. Yesterday, there were 78 children in foster care who were absent from their placement. You also have in front of you, we produce a daily youth recovery report. I think you have a one-pager that shows some demographics on children in care. We've created a special response team to help us have meaningful and positive engagement with youth who might be on run so that we can prevent run, recover youth, and also do some system changes. So this special response team across the state is a team of 12. They're non-case carrying. They are dedicated to helping support the case management team to prevent run behaviors and to create stability and help find some anchors for those young people. We have been trying to learn as much as we can about children and youth on run. Slide 24 kind of looks at some of the attributes as we learn about these young people. What we know from, we did sort of a snapshot review in August, and about every 6 months, we look at some of these attributes to see if we're improving. So what you can tell from that is 25% of the youth who were missing on that day, that was their first run episode. They had not run before. What can we do in a meaningful way to impact their lives? But we also know that over 40% on that day, they had had 4 or more experiences with the prior run episode. What are the implications for those young persons, and how can we help them? So we are wanting to learn more about them. We know that the youth who have had experience with 4 or more runs have incredible grief and loss. We know from the data that they have experienced the loss of a parent either through death of a parent or parental rights terminated. So what does that mean for our practice? How can we integrate that and help create anchors to prevent any future run behaviors? What's ahead for children who are missing from placement? We want to strengthen the work that I mentioned around creating anchors, creating those relational permanencies. We also need to do a lot more work in Sedgwick County. Sedgwick County on any given day might have between 27 and 30 of the total youth, so that could be, a third or more of the total young persons who are absent from placement. So we are working with St. Francis Ministries in the community to think about how can we impact Sedgwick County for them. The other special population we want to mention is youth, and the term we use is children or youth who are experiencing a failure to place. Sometimes it's also known as children who might be in an office of one of our case management agencies. But the term we use is a failure to place. We were unable to find a placement at night, so they stayed in an office. So that's the connection. Failure to place is one of the emphasis that we need to remedy and eliminate with regard to the settlement agreement. So we do have a very technical definition, and it's there for you on slide 27. Talking a little bit about the trends on slide 28 of children in failure to place. In January, on your chart there, January is empty. But we know in January so far we've had 2. It was 2 children and 2 different instances in terms of a failure to place. So what that means for this state fiscal year is 127 total instances, but that involved 38 children. So the figures you see are the number of times it happens, but the number of times it happens may have been with the same young person or the same child. There's a very specific process that's laid out on slide 29 on failure to place. We do receive it as a critical incident, and they're notified. We want to learn from them. So within about 48 hours of a child experiencing a failure to place, our central administration and locals get together and talk about what happened, how did it happen, how could it be prevented. So we are trying to learn in the moment so that we can reduce and eliminate that pattern. And as it involves a lot of collaboration as well. What's working well in the failure to place, and I'm on slide 31, are partnerships with other groups and providers to help us fill in some gaps so that we don't experience this. Opportunities we have that we're learning are we need to engage young people maybe in different ways. We do experience sometimes that young people, they don't want to go to a placement. They have reservations about going there, so they just rather stay in the office. And so we have work to do to create an environment where they feel like they can go stay somewhere. So that work continues. overall, wanted to sort of give a context of some foundational changes that are really happening and have been happening in the past couple of years. We are working more with collaboration to support families. We know communities are experts, families are experts and innovators. We're engaging more voice in design of our service array, and we want to continue that. And the community engagement is really how can we engage community and providers and supports earlier, always earlier, to prevent the unnecessary need for DCF to be involved. We want to shift from mandated reporters to mandated supporters and support schools as well, and those natural supports for families. And we really want to understand how responses to adversity, relating so we can distinguish between adversity and neglect or poverty and neglect. So those are some of the foundational changes on moving to a child and family well-being system. I'm going to shift a little bit to information that you guys are interested in terms of prevention. So we'll start talking about that on slide 33. Kansas has been part of a couple of really exciting collaborations with the National Governors Association and some national foundations such as Annie E. Casey Foundation, Casey Family Programs, around some learning models. We have been able to work with the Emporia School District this past year on the community supporting families, where we're working with them to put supports in the school that can help families meet concrete needs and maybe address some of those adversity needs to prevent an unnecessary report, the DCF. So we have a partnership with them. They just recently, I think they're going to hire soon, hopefully by Valentine's Day, but their school board approved. DCF has given them a grant where they can have a school district employee who's a family advocate or a family service navigator on staff in the school that will be able to respond to families' needs if they have some concrete needs or they need to navigate some services to help their well-being. So we're pretty excited about the Emporia School District pilot program. Overall, in terms of strengthening prevention, we implemented in October the Kansas Family Crisis Response and Support, which is a statewide toll-free call center. If you're, for any child in Kansas, not just those in foster care, but for any child, if they're experiencing an emotional crisis, there's a number you can call statewide where that call will be met with a triage. And depending on the nature of that emotional crisis, there might be a mobile response to the location of the child, whether that's school, home, wherever that child is, they'll go and respond to that. We also have a pilot with Kansas Legal Services where we offer, in about 6 counties right now, access to parent legal services, representation. So what that is, if we assign a report, a child report for a family, we offer them a service and say, if you're interested, if you have a need, Kansas Legal Services could do a consult with you and you have access to parent representation services. And we make that referral if the family is interested. And then the family works with Kansas Legal Services, and DCF covers that cost, but we know that parent will work with Kansas Legal Services on their own. So that's a prevention service. Family First Prevention Services, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And then we also have in our array Family Preservation Services, which we've had since about 1997. Getting a little bit more specific into the Family First. Really, it was federal legislation that started in 2018 that created a pathway so that Title IV dollars, which traditionally just for foster care, we can start using them for prevention services. So it created that pathway. So it reinvests in prevention. It really had an emphasis on family-based placements in that federal law. And then we knew it required a lot of systemic partnerships. Categorically, families that are eligible are any child who's at risk, or the term is called a candidate for foster care, but any child, a family whose child is at risk for entering foster care is eligible. Families who have recently reunified or perhaps experienced an adoption are eligible for Family First services, and any pregnant or parenting youth in foster care is also eligible for Family First array of services. On slide 39, you have a little bit of an information about a service track and how in the body of our work when we're completing our assessment, how decisions might be made on whether or not to refer to a community-based service, family preservation, or family first. A little bit of information on slide 40 on the actual array for family first. There are 4 large categories of major services that are included in the federal law. That evidence-based for substance use disorder, mental health, parent skill building, and then kinship services. Kansas does have services in each of these 4 major evidence-based services, and we awarded those grants in October of 2019. So they're in process. Some examples of the mental health, for example, are family-centered treatment, functional family therapy, multi-systemic therapy, parent-child interaction therapy. These are all providers that are grantees of DCF and are serving families. We make a referral to them. So they're providers in your communities doing these services. So far, I'm on slide 41, we've served over 1,900 families through Family First since October of 2019. And you've got a little bit of information there on the distribution by our region. What's been really great is the outcomes. We know that 91% of all these families that have been served since October 2019 have not entered foster care within 12 months. So in terms of its intended outcome and goal, we have achieved the goal because 91% do not enter care. Our program evaluation on the outcomes is by University of Kansas School of Social Welfare. They've been a great partner and they have a great model for their evaluation. There's also, on slide 44, we have a advisory group that includes a family advisory council that is helping us improve and learn from our work in Family First. Wanted to shift a little bit now to foster care payments and budget. With regard to the foster care budget, for the case management services, so to those 4 large providers, that payment structure, it's a monthly payment to that case management agency. It's based on the number of children in care on the last day of the prior month. So that's how that payment structure works. We also then would have a payment to placement providers. Those happen twice monthly or biweekly, and they're based on the number of children and the number of days that they were in a particular placement based on a daily rate. So that's another payment we have. We also have various other types of payments. You know, for example, adoption home studies. There are some other assessments that we pay for, including qualified residential treatment programs. And to clarify, psychiatric residential treatment facility placements, those are covered through Medicaid, so they would not be in the foster care budget. I've got some information here for you on the consensus caseload. Recent numbers for foster care. Slide 47 has some detailed foster care budget. And then I just wanted to spend a moment to talk about the Family First requested enhancements that are in the governor's budget recommendations. As you can see from some of the data, we've been able to reduce the number of children coming into care. We want to continue to do that. We know those 4 major themed services that we talked about for Family First, substance use disorder, mental health services, parent skill building, those are really showing promise. We want to increase our Family First budget so we can get more services and more families connected to those prevention services. For example, multi-systemic therapy, functional family therapy. Those prevention services are really supporting families, and we've requested an enhancement. All funds, $7 million, but the SGF is 3.5. An additional enhancement we've requested is to help us with some gaps that we have in state general fund. When we awarded the Family First grants, some of those programs that we awarded were not categorically had the rating of well supported by a federal clearinghouse that makes a determination on whether or not something is eligible for 50% federal funding. We knew there were some programs that made sense for Kansas, and we wanted to support those programs, so we used SGF for that. Through the past year and a half, what we have found from our federal partners clearinghouse is that there are a couple programs that were categorized as well supported. So we received the 50% match, which is what we expected. But then a determination was made sort of midway that no, actually that program isn't well supported. So maybe Kansas, you can't have the 50% federal match, for a certain set of months. And for us, since we do grants for a full year, that created some pockets and gaps where we didn't have enough state general funds in that pocket to be able to cover it. So we're also requesting a little bit more state dollars in those instances where our federal partners have changed the match, if that makes sense. So Family First, it's hard to believe, but it started in October of 2019. Those grants were four-year grants, so their final year for the Family First would end June of 2023, next year. So that means really in the next few months, we're going to again begin the RFP process so that we would be able to award a new set of, or continue and award a new set of Family First grants. And you've got a little bit of the timeline there on slide 50. Kind of wanted to just talk about sort of a future vision. Our approaches are really about moving towards thriving families, moving towards a child and family well-being system. We want to become a kin-first state and support families. We want to advance racial equity across our programs, remove the stigma from seeking help, and find ways through our program delivery and opportunities we have in our prevention work to do that. We want to be able to support family resource centers towards that, create a warm line for folks to call. For example, how Kansas uses 1-800-CHILDREN so well in this state. We want to begin more intersections with school-based resources, like I mentioned, with the Emporia School District. And we want to continue to support home visiting in a way, because we know that children entering foster care, that age of 0 to 4, and how critical early childhood and those supports we know are promising to prevent foster care. Thanks so much for the opportunity to go through a lot of this information. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Keys, for being here today, and we'll go ahead and open up for questions. Obviously, we've made some progressive steps in regards to the foster care situation in the state of Kansas, and I kind of want to go back and circle back to what you classify as the failure to place. And there was a few years ago where the press was talking about, children who were staying in DCF offices, and you had actually talked about this at our legislative budget committee meeting during the interim. And so can you describe the environment that a child experiences in the office as opposed to what was relayed in the press? It's completely different than what was described in some of the articles or in the newscasts when a child is basically there's a failure to place. So can you just kind of describe what the environment is for that child?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. Our case management provider agencies, their offices where they're located in cities and in communities, those are family-friendly buildings. They serve families and youth all day long. So they have a number of, within their building structure, they have a number of rooms that are set up for family-friendly. So they might have TVs, they might have playrooms. They do have opportunities for bed or day beds, slumber. So when children need to stay in an office, they have access to all the comforts in terms of a bed, meal, toys, entertainment, enrichment, they would have that opportunity. I think sometimes in the media, maybe there have been past articles that described children maybe on floors or those kinds of things. And each of our case management agencies have family-friendly offices. They do have beds, they do have appropriate furniture and enrichment activities for any young person that needs to stay overnight while they're looking for a placement. And they also arrange staffing for such that they have more than one staff who are there on site if a young person needs to be there overnight. Thank you.
All right, and thank you for that clarification, because I think what has been misinterpreted in the headlines is that the kids are in an office laying on the floor, and actually there is a suitable environment when those children are taken to a DCF office, and they can't be placed, like you said, in the middle of the night. So I just wanted to clarify, and thank you for that clarification. Could you describe exactly what becoming a kin first state would be?
So becoming a kin first state is an opportunity for us to think about how our agency works alongside families and community organizations to include family voice. And so, for example, implementing some approaches. We've implemented a Kansas practice model where in our prevention, we want to include families. So part of our Family First prevention is a KinTech grant to Kansas Legal Services, where if a family is experiencing a legal need, maybe they need help with guardianship, they've experienced an emergency, they need resources to help them manage their legal situation on their own. That is something that DCF supports. So we want to support families to be able to resolve matters on their own safely within resources. Another example of an approach of becoming a kin first state is to invite families into meetings, a team decision making before a child is removed into care, to see what resources they have, how could they be a placement, how could they be a support to the family, either in a prevention service to prevent foster care, or if they're not able to be a provider, how can they be a resource for a child and a voice for a child in care. We're also including family voice in our advisory groups actively. And there's just, to become a kin first state, we need to recognize that families are innovative. Families can and do contribute to solutions and prevention. And we need to engage them in a different way, earlier and earlier.
Well, and I think, and I've been an advocate for the universal home visits. When we did a tour of childcare in North Carolina a few years ago, that was one thing that they professed actually helped the child care system in North Carolina. And so I've been an advocate for that before. But kind of putting you on the spot for a little bit, obviously everybody is talking about the surplus that we currently have with the state of Kansas budget. And so I would kind of ask, what would be a one-time investment in regards to either Families First or for DCF in regards to foster care that you would identify for fiscal year 2023? And this may be a more extensive conversation that you probably have with Chairman Carpenter in the Social Services Budget Committee. But right now, I would say, what would you identify as a one-time item in regards to foster care or Families First?
A one-time item could be investments in family resource centers that support families in their local communities to start up those. Sometimes they're school-based or library-based, so they support a family. I think there's an estimate out there that to operate a family resource center annually is about $125,000 per site, depending on their location. We also look forward to the investments in increasing the Family First prevention budget by the $3.5 million SGF, so we can do additional mental health supports to families so they can help address their mental health issues on their own through resources in their community. But I think what we've learned from some of our outcomes is that investing in mental health and investing in the services that help families with young children ages 0 to 4 make a difference. Those are promising, and there are a number of ways to do that out there.
All right, thank you. Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I remember hearing the family's first presentation a couple of years ago when we had people in town to present to us. I don't know that I've ever remembered a presentation better than I had that one. It seemed like the federal government got something right because they were putting their resources on the prevention end instead of on the end where after the problems have ensued. So I noticed that your kids in need of foster care has gone down. Do you make a direct correlation to Families First on that?
We know there's a mix. What we know from outcomes is that, yes, the 1,900 families that have been served since October of 2019 that may or may not have received that type of intervention earlier, but we know those 1,900 families, 91% of them, those children were served and did not enter foster care. But we also know that there are a number of other community pieces. For example, the mental health in schools program, that makes a difference. Home visiting programs that are across state agencies and supported through the Children's Cabinet, through Department of Health and Environment, and through the schools. Those services to families whose children are 0 to 4 really help. So I think that's the piece about we want communities to be able to support families. And we know we're one part of that, and Family First has demonstrated in the data that it is one piece of that. But I don't know that we have data that that's the only thing that's helping. I think it's more than that, especially the mental health in schools.
And then, let me see, oh, and your increase in adoptions, I've noticed. What do you attribute that to? What is helping that process?
I think our peak in finalized adoptions was in 2019. I don't know the dynamics of what occurred in 2019. There were some additional efforts, and we received technical assistance from KC Family Programs to implement a couple of review items where they would look at those children who had the longest wait to permanency. Were there any technical pieces that were holding up that adoption? Maybe a missing birth certificate or, something in the process that the children had permanency with their family. But in terms of the legal permanency, I think there were some technical pieces that were holding up that actual adoption consent. So in 2018, I understand there were some efforts to get through some what I would call more technical or paperwork backlogs so that actual adoption consent could be completed.
Well, great work on that. And then my final question is, you talked about the timely permanency item in the 4 different counties across Kansas, and you're working with judicial districts on that. So could you help me understand a little more what factors are causing that, or what are you trying to fix? I don't completely understand that.
Yeah, well, we want to make sure that families have timely legal permanency. And so for a child in the first 12 months, usually if they leave foster care, it's for reason of reunification. But what the federal measure looks at is the release of custody. So a child could go home, say, for example, in August, and maybe that's month 8. They've been in care 8 months, and they return home in August. Well, if we want to have with this specific success indicator, our federal partners are looking at, but were they released from court custody by the 12th month? So maybe by December. So it's a very specific measure that looks at a release of custody, which is triggered by a court date. So it's what we're trying to achieve is to understand barriers or pieces that might, whether it's a court docket or scheduling or calendaring, if it's that simple that we could get that release of custody date in the 12th month versus month 13 or 14. So that's a simple example. It might be more complicated for some families if those children have returned home in August. And we want to make sure that they have stability of that. Are we providing all the right supports after they've been returned home? Do they have the school supports they need? Do the parents have the supports they need? We need to make sure that our practice is really creating stability when a child does return home, and that the reason the court hasn't released custody isn't related to a lasting safety issue. So we are going to need to continue to work to distinguish, is a lack of timely legal permanency related to lasting safety, or is it related to procedures that are more technical about a calendar? Does that make sense?
It does. That's very helpful. Thank you very much, and thank you for you and your team's work on all these issues. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Landwehr, who's joining us by WebEx. Representative Landwehr, are you there? Okay, we'll move on to the next individual, Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good news. We've spent a chunk of money getting there, so it wasn't free, but it's good news. A couple of questions here. I didn't see in here any reference to the number of foster care families. Are they increasing, declining? We having trouble with foster care families?
Yeah, you have a map in your presentation on the number of foster families. Each foster homes, I think the number was about maybe 2,200. The capacity in each home could be up to 4 children. So one home could serve up to 4 if they're licensed for up to 4. We always need more family foster homes, especially for older youth, for sibling groups, and for children with high needs. In terms of, I do have some data on new applications for family foster homes. So in 2020, the number of new applications we had for family foster homes was 766. But in 2021, calendar year, 2021, we had 987. So we did experience an increase in applications in 2021 compared to 2020.
But I asked how many foster care parents we have compared to, say, 2 years ago.
The number that are active has decreased about 5% since 2019.
That was it. Family First, staffing. Are we fully staffed?
I don't have information on all of the programs for the grantees for Family First. I do have some feedback from Community Solutions, who's our provider of multi-systemic therapy. So they have a lot of counties across the state. They are experiencing, it's a program we'd like to expand, really, and we know it works. And so we've offered to expand in either a couple of cities or to maybe a new community where they can do more, such as Pittsburgh or Southeast. And they have shared recently that they've had trouble hiring some folks in terms of qualified clinicians for that. But I don't have information for all of the programs, parent skill building, et cetera. We could try to get some information, but I really only have information from one of our providers that they have had some difficulty hiring qualified clinicians.
Very good. Thank you. We'll deal with that in the budget hearing. Thank you.
Representative Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, thanks for coming. Every time you do one of these presentations, I learn something new. Last year, we approved the pilot program for foster teens to acquire a driver's license. Can you update us on that pilot program?
Yes, the We Can Drive program, and our contracted partner is DECA, and so they've got a great social media campaign. The pilot is for sort of some northeast counties on the Nebraska border, so Topeka up north is the pilot area that we had for, I believe, $250,000 in the budget. I didn't bring that data with me, but I know that for the number of youth that they could serve, they've served 40. They've had more referrals than they can serve with their current budget. They'd love to serve more, so it's been successful. They've been able to provide support for driver's education, insurance, and some other incidentals that are associated with, successful driving. So it has been a great success, and they've done a great job of marketing it so they can get that information out to those in that catchment area who would be eligible. So thank you for that.
Can I follow up? So how long do you anticipate the pilot program to run? And do we have a cost yet for what? We use Chafee funds for that, right? I think
I can get the funding mix for you.
I think that was fully funded with Chafee. But anyway, I'd like to know what the cost would be to go statewide with that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Mr.
so
Chair.
much. We can get those figures.
All right. Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and have a few questions. Thank you, Tanya,
Fine.
for being here. Appreciate it. So I want to just visit for a minute about the funding, and I'm curious that you didn't mention one-time funds upgrading the computer system that you all have, and I feel like we've put money in that, but I don't know where we are with it, and it seems like a way that we can, in my mind, help permanency faster, be faster for kiddos, because it's going to be easier for caseworkers if we have a really integrated computer system. So what's the update on that?
Yeah, thank you. So it's the Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System, also sometimes referred to as CWIS. But yes, that is part of our base budget that we invest in that. We've spent the past about 5 weeks, since mid-December, so a little bit more than 5 weeks, hearing what we would call demonstrations from different vendors, so that it helps us get an idea for when we write a request for proposal for someone to come in and help build the system, or if it's off the shelf, depending on the bid, that we are really honing in on the attributes that we would want to put forth in a request for proposal. So where we're at is we have all the necessary approvals for this point for our implementation plan from our federal partners, as well as KETO and CETO with regard to some of those steps. When we get done seeing all the demos, then we will write a request for proposal that would be put out for bid for a vendor to come in and either build or navigate and install the CWIS. And you're right, the benefit of the CWIS is all of our case management entities would get to use the same information system. Right now, we're operating on about 4 or 5 different information systems, and only a few of those talk to each other.
Mm-hmm. I know that, yeah. So the time frame on that, though, it sounds like we're still a ways off of getting that.
Yeah, I can get for the committee the actual time frame for when the RFP is hoped to be vetted through Department of Administration and posted.
Okay, and then if I may, Mr. Chairman.
You may.
Thank you. Okay, so just a few questions that have to do with permanency. That's something that I feel very passionately about. And, for the federal standard, permanency in 12 months, for us to just be at 40%, I feel like that's a failing grade. And I know it's better, we're getting better, but I just have to mention that I think there are things we can do to quicken our permanency. And, one of them is, and there's no way you can cover everything. And of course, Safe Families, I do feel like has done a great job with reintegration. But there's also, my heart about adoption, that I know the courts implemented the adoption tracking tool. And you didn't mention that. Of course, again, you can't mention everything, but how are you all using that adoption tracking tool, and is that helpful? And do you know what I'm talking about? In July, the department, you began using it, but it's really through the court system. So what's going on with that?
Yes, yes, and thank you. I didn't address all the adoption permanency outcomes in the presentation, so thank you. A couple of the adoption permanency outcomes we're meeting. We do have a number of, I think one statewide, we're meeting timely adoption, and in another adoption outcome, the majority of our catchment areas are meeting it. But yes, the adoption tracking tool helps look at different points in time. Are we at the milestone that we should be at? Are we making progress towards a decision on was the decision to change the goal to the adoption timely? Do we have all the documents we need? What is missing for me is, I mean, the tool itself is really helpful. I do think during the pandemic, so what would have now been, 2020, a while ago, there were opportunities where, in terms of administrative orders, sometimes if there was an appeal for a termination of parental rights, that was stayed so that they could be able to hear it in person. So I don't have the data from that on Office of Judicial Administration, but anecdotally, what we have heard is that there were some delays with regard to pandemic procedures implemented in the in the courts for due process of termination of parental rights. But yes, the adoption tool is very helpful to track a path for timeliness.
And the committee may not have been aware of it, but it is something that's been implemented. And then one other thing, Ken First, of course, that's a great goal. We all agree if it's first. And my question is, in our Kansas Code for Children, and it's KSA 38-2202, the definitions that are in that code, the definition of kinship care placement means the placement of a child in the home of an adult with whom the child or the child's parent already has close emotional ties. So kin can be someone not blood related if there's close emotional ties. And my question is, at what point does a child who has lived in a foster care home for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, at what point are they considered kin in your statistics?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that those close emotional ties, and I know this comes up quite a bit. I think what we count on is for the team who is working locally in the community with that family, they know those relationships, they understand those connections, and they know what's in the best interest of the child. So I don't know that we have a categorical statewide definition of at what point, if a child has been living in a licensed family foster home, when they become kin, we know they have close ties, but we trust that the local team really making that decision is able to distinguish what's in the best interest of the child, given that who is around that child at the time and their network, and who's really interested in being part of that child's life.
Okay, and so you're saying that the child placement, you call them the grantees, the case management providers, they're really the ones making the decision as far as the placement? I understand the court has to okay it, but really the ones making the recommendation and decision would be those grantees.
Well, I'm not sure which decision you're speaking of. If it's a decision to change a placement, yes, the grantees make a decision to change a placement. We do have, in our practice model, we have a procedure, it's called team decision making, that happened where those who are part of that child's life come together. So it could include family, a guardian ad litem, a CASA, a current or prior maybe placement. They come together when there's a need to change a placement, and they talk about that. So in the process, team decision making is a group way to have a discussion on what's the best placement for this child. Decisions about adoption or best interest staffing are also a collective. So guardian ad litems, CASA, treatment providers, others are invited to a best interest staffing with regard to adoption.
Yeah, but they don't vote and say, okay, the majority of this group in the best interest staffing think that the child should be placed such and such. It is definitely input from a group in the best interest staffing, but the placement decision is actually made by not the caseworker, but the agency?
The decision to place a child could be made by the case manager
No.
in consultation with their supervisor. Yes.
Okay. Okay, and then, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My last thing is, do you have any statistics on the mandated reporters that, so thankful that the number of fosters has gone down, but, I've had people say, oh, maybe it's because they weren't in school and there weren't mandated reporters. Do you have statistics, like how many reports you had from, pre-COVID to when children were in school remote? I mean, is that something that you've looked at all?
Yes, thank you. We looked at that in 2020 to compare to 2019, and we know for April, May, and June of 2020 that our reports received to the agency went down as much as 50%. So for example, I think in April they reduced 50% and then 40%. And then later in the year, the number of reports we received had restored or come back up to balance, which what would have been expected for that month. What we also know from the distribution of those reports is that the same percentage of reports were from categories of what we would call mandated reporters. So for example, we can look at categories of educators, social service personnel, and see were we still having the same, even though our reports were reduced, was it really the same percentage of reports from a type of reporter? And there wasn't a change. We still had a high percentage of reports from what we would consider mandated reporter categories.
Yeah, super. I mean, that's good. And I appreciate hearing that. Thank you. And then I would be negligent if I didn't mention to this committee that I know there's so many moving parts and there's a lot of things that can help out, but there's an organization, Safe Families. It is a little bit like Families First. I mean, it's confusing, but it's also doing good prevention work before children go into the system. And so just look forward to hearing more about how DCF and Safe Families are going to work together to, again, just help the number of fosters go down. So
yes, thank you. Yeah, they have been a grantee of DCF for a number of years in prevention. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your work. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Prael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. And one of my first question has really already been answered, and that's on the failure to place and what happens with children that are left in the office overnight. And it's not like left in the office. You answered that very well, and the more you can get the word out, I would appreciate that because it's so important. Actually, my second question is, we have these children or youth that run. Is there any particular line where it says if they run 10 times or 12 times, and then there's other consequences, or they're taken out of there? What happens to these youth?
Yeah, thank you for that. There is current statutory structure in the Child in Need of Care Code where youth who are absent from placement without approval for more than 2 consecutive times could have an opportunity to be heard in front of the court for what's called a secure care hearing. So there are some due process pieces with regard to specific hearings and notices for hearings with regard to secure care placements. We have one secure care provider who's in Geary County in Kansas who is a secure care, and if in that hearing they are ordered to secure care, there's time limits. Each period of time that they would be in that placement is 60 days. So there's very specific statutory provisions with regard to secure care hearings and placements for children in need of care.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions are really quick. First of all, the foster care report card, is that something that you can provide? It is provided to the Education Committee, not mine, and the House and Senate, but it would be a great resource for all of us if that could be sent to us. I wasn't able to find the current one. I found the 2019-2020 one. Second question is related to compensation. So when we talk about 51% of our families or our children are faced with placed with families and that we are trying to move to permanency for our kids, how does the compensation change when they are placed with family members? Or how does the compensation change when there's permanency and there's guardianship? Is there still payments for the foster care children?
Thank you for your questions. Yes, we can get you, the committee, a copy of the most recent foster care report card. Is your question about support to the family after the child leaves foster care or during?
It's related to financial support. Is there any difference between monthly financial support for those children that are placed with family members, and how does that change when we are seeking permanency? Is there any negative incentive to not go towards permanency because you lose a financial assistance? And the reason I bring this up is because I have had a constituent that had a relative that lived with them, and they had ceased receiving payments, and it was a hardship to them. And so then they would potentially have to relinquish that guardianship. And so I just wanted to understand that. And then I do have a quick secondary question.
Okay, thank you. With regard to daily rates for children in placement while they're in foster care, we have 5 levels of care. There are 5 levels of care for a licensed family foster home. There are 5 levels of care for a relative. So the daily payment for a relative provider can range from $11 a day up to $108 a day. There are 5 levels, and the case manager makes a decision on that level of care based on the needs of the child. So that would be the daily rate for children placed with relatives. The 5 levels of care for family foster homes ranges from $24 a day to $108 a day. There are some exceptions if the child is on a waiver, so there are more arrays there. And we could provide the committee the complete list arrays. So that's while they're in care. Those are the daily rates for the number of days in a month that child is living there. Depending on the nature of their permanency, they might be eligible for adoption assistance subsidy after permanency or guardianship subsidy. And those amounts would vary by family. What I know is that an average adoption, statewide, an average adoption assistance subsidy payment is about, I think, $270 a month. The average guardianship assistance payment is a little bit less, I think $240. But again, that's an average, and those adoption assistance or guardianship subsidy would be really based on the needs of the child. So they might vary.
Okay, that's very helpful. And then my last question, it comes up so often when we talk about the Department of Education, our public schools, and also in our discussion today about DCF. We talk about the physical well-being of the children. We talk about the mental and emotional well-being of the children. I rarely, if ever, hear about the other portion of well-being, which is the spiritual well-being. When that is ignored, then there's a part of that child that can never be fully whole. So does DCF have an explicit, this is not an area that we talk to, or is it incorporated in the counseling in the whole plan to take care of the child's whole needs, which is partly spiritual?
Yes, we want children in care to maintain any connection that they can have to faith community and to other communities that's meaningful for them. So we support and try to make sure that placement providers and our case management agencies have the resources so they can keep that child connected to their community of faith and other communities that they might identify with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the computer. What'd you say, CWIS? Is that what?
Yes, CWIS.
How long have you been working on that?
I can get a date that the agency began working on it. I believe at least since 2017 were preliminary plans for a feasibility study for CWIS. There are, because it is such an investment for states and we do draw down federal dollars to support it, there are a number of approval processes with our federal partners as well as major IT projects. But I can check and
Okay.
get back to the
And
committee on when it started.
Have we been putting money into it every year from state general fund?
Yes, there has been some, yes, state general fund for costs of project management, feasibility study, the different phases that any agency has to go through with an IT project. Yes, state dollars would have supported that.
Okay. Well, you mentioned that you're doing, now, I don't know why I can't think. You're doing, having them come in and give you.
Demonstrations.
Yes, thank you. My goodness. How are you doing that before the RFP and not, are those companies going to be able to, the ones that are coming in, are they going to be able to be part of the RFP?
Yes, they would be able to. And because we have not started the RFP process, there's a provision where an agency can exercise demonstration projects to come in so that we're able to look at attributes of a system, maybe not attributes of that vendor, but attributes of a system that we might want to describe and put as a deliverable or as a functionality that we would want to include in our RFP. So it is permissible within the planning process to do so.
Okay. Well, I guess it kind of throws a little bit of a red flag for me. I'm not sure that. How do you do the RFP without making sure that you're not writing that RFP to get a certain company if you've seen the demonstrations beforehand? I didn't realize that that's how sometimes they did it. I've kind of gotten a little bit into the weeds with unemployment compensation program, and it seems a little bit like the cart before the horse, but I guess I'd be interested in having some more conversations about that, because if you have demonstrations by companies, it'd be very easy then to write a RFP that would be very beneficial to one company over another company if you know exactly what they're going to provide. So what's the total cost of that, estimate of that program?
When it's fully operational, I don't have those figures with me, but we can get you the annual CWIS operations
Okay, I
as a
appreciate
budget
that.
item.
Yeah, I would like to get a little more information on that. Thank you, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at slide 42, and part of that is you indicated the goal for number one for those children who have reached the 12 months was 91%. Who sets these goals?
These goals are part of our grant, so they were a requirement in the DCF grant for Family First. They are modeled after some federal indicators or other federal programs that do prevention, and also were modeled after Family Preservation Services, which since 1997 has had a contract outcome that 90% of children not be removed. So there were some precedents involved with establishing the goal of 90%.
Thank you. I was wondering, was it associated with family preservation? Because that reminded me of that. Now, the other representatives have been asked you about the runners. I've had people say, what happens with foster children who really don't want to go home? You know, we're trying to keep them together, and we put them back in a situation. If we took them out, we monitor and everything else. But maybe there's things going on in the family that we really don't know, and families are not really talking about it. But what happens if a child really doesn't want to go back home?
Yeah. So for youth who are absent from their placement or they're on run, I mean, that our goal is to be able to engage them and understand what is the barrier or what anchor are they trying to reach? Where do they want to be? So those just happen in conversations. We need to convince them and help them find a network where they can live that they would be stable. Your question asks about when they want to return home. We don't know if they would want to return home to a prior placement, maybe a licensed family foster home or a relative. Maybe they do want to return home. They don't want to be in foster care anymore, and they'd like to be living with their family. So we ask those questions as well. I don't know that I have an answer of what happens to them. What we want to happen is that we get them stable with a place to live and an anchor and somehow connected to their community or their school or an organization or a music class or something where they feel connected and they no longer want to run.
Okay. I use run as just an example, but I'm talking also about the student or that young person. Do they have to be a specific age when they say, I don't want to go home? Or do we force them to go back into that situation when we really don't know exactly what's going on because we want to make sure we look good in terms of they stay at home? I'm just thinking of the safety of that child.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I misunderstood your question.
Maybe I didn't ask it
So
either. Thank you.
in our work of when there's a parent-youth conflict or there's something going on in the home and that young person doesn't want to stay or doesn't feel like they can safely stay at home, we would have a conversation with the family, identify supports needed. But again, if the safest decision is foster care, then that young person will enter foster care and will continue services that are appropriate to meet that young person or the family's needs and work on that case plan goal.
Okay, thank you. And I just have one more question. On slide 47, I'm looking at the budget. And when I get to 3323, temporary assistance to needy families, have we always gotten money from TANF?
Yes, TANF dollars is part of the funding mix for the state's foster care program.
Oh, that one. Yeah, because I mean, I've noticed the budget, this budget I have almost memorized. This one I'm looking at, I kind of missed that one. I just wondered, was that a new one? And the 530, the number you have behind it, is that the?
Oh, I think that's a budget unit code.
Okay.
I think, I apologize, I don't know what BU is, but I think it's a funding code.
Yeah, 'cause, you know, I'm looking at this one and you would say, okay, if we look at this number, that's, 32. I'm assuming that's 32 million. Okay,
That's what we're taking out of TANF.
okay, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start on slide 42. And first of all, I want to compliment you that all of your goals are very measurable and they're empirical versus being subjective. And it just makes a big difference to me. I know that this doesn't quite exist yet, but moving forward, I would love to see an annualized look at this as you gather more details so we can see how it's working over time on a per annum basis. And for slide 26 and 23, let me flip back there real quick. I'm kind of looking at this at the same thing. I really, I'm sorry, let me start with slide 26 before I move on. I wanted to know how many individual children stayed in the offices on an annual basis over the last 10 years. Is that information that you guys have?
I believe we'd be able to get the individual count. We only have data back to, I believe, April of 2018.
Okay.
That's on the chart.
All right, I'll take what you.
Yes, April of 2018.
All right, I'll take what you have available. I appreciate that willingness to look. And on page 23, we're talking about the children missing from placement. And again, I would love a 10-year look back on an annual basis on the number of children who were not present. If you want to break it down further into, how many times a child went missing, that's fine, but that's not really what I'm looking for, so I don't want to put you to extra work, because I think you had that broken out somewhere else. Page 19. You talk about the 15 aggregate data performance outcomes. Could we please have a list of what those are?
Yes.
Or did I miss them? Okay, and if I missed them, I apologize, because when the paperwork came in, I was trying to catch up with you. And could I see a sample, of course, without a child's identifying information in it, but a sample of what the monthly data management report looks like?
Yes, we can, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all I had.
Representative Helgerson.
Thank you very much. Many of the statistics are very encouraging, but I don't see any notice in your report about we are in unprecedented times and how COVID may have improved or caused harm to the families and to the children. In your statistics, how have you taken into effect those dramatic changes?
I don't think that the data has been adjusted for any norms that might be related to public health or otherwise. We know that our providers have provided extra supports to families, whether or not those are concrete needs or others. So we know that there have been families in need, and our especially prevention providers and the foster care providers provided extra support to families in ways, but I don't know that we know yet how that has impacted outcomes over time. So I don't think it's reflected in the data.
Okay. It would be helpful for me, I'll use a baseball analogy since they just reported on who's going into the Hall of Fame or at Cooperstown, you put an asterisk. These are unprecedented times, and they are very positive, but they are also in some of the times that more money has been pumped into the system by the federal government, almost an unrealistic amount of support at times. And I think it's probably helpful if the last few years we put that in. Second, there have been several articles and discussions about subcontractors for the agency. And I'm guessing I didn't see how you deal with corrective measures for when a problem occurs and there is and a contractor is derelict, or if not derelict, has been unresponsive to the problems of some children in their care, and you're almost in a no-win situation. You have to, they're the only provider, but yet they made mistakes. What corrective measures do you have in place to deal with the subcontractors?
So in terms of quality assurance, that would be relative to the worry or the concern. If it is related to a deliverable in the grant with regard to performance outcome, we would work with them on a performance improvement or a corrective action plan. That could be regarding an administrative requirement, such as, maintain case files, something of that nature, or it could be we need more children to achieve timely permanency. There are also quality assurance procedures we have with regard to financial audits, administrative type audits to make sure that they're maintaining their accreditation. So we do have an ability, and it is in our grant language, that we could implement either corrective action or a performance improvement plan, and that would be relative to the concern or the worry that comes forth. We work alongside our grantees and help them develop those plans and make sure that whatever the issue was, that we want improvement and we want remedy.
Well, clearly, the worst case would be if a child dies. And I assume that that's being tracked across the state. How many children die in the various contractors?
Any child fatality is notified to the secretary through a critical incident process. So there are protocols in place for child fatalities and after review. And also, we also then work with the State Child Death Review Board and all of those procedures as well. So yes, there are specific policies and procedures to follow for critical incidents.
Are those available for legislators to review?
Are the policies available?
The policies and the actual reports?
Yes, the policies are available and they're on our website. There's a very specific statutory framework in terms of access to child fatality information. So we could get you that statutory information on the summary that's available and any other in-depth review that very certain committees, and I'm not recalling which committees at this time, would have access to in a closed session. But there is statutory language around that, yes.
I understand the need for the statutory language, but my question is, if subcontractor A has, and we consider a death a number one, how many number ones occurred? How many serious? And do you rank them so we can get some idea on whether or not the subcontractors are doing a good job or whether or not they're doing a bad job? And that's completely separate from whether or not financially they're doing, they have maintained and provided the information and are fiscally sound.
Yes, thank you. I agree. Yes, any aggregate data we have would be available. It's available publicly into this committee. I apologize. I thought you were asking for individual and for child-specific information.
Thank you very much.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see the late hour, so I'll be quick. And the representative from Sedgwick kind of was on the same line. And I don't want to play gotcha. I mean, my word. I mean, there's a ton of information in a short amount of time, and this isn't necessarily my bailiwick. So, but I, you know, there's one that has been in my area. I'm up in the Northwest for a long time. They've been in the news, in other places. So, not necessarily to call them out, but just the whole structure, kind of what the representative from Sedgwick said. I mean, how are all these, the foster care management grantees, are they solid? Are they doing what? Because I guess what history shows is that, especially in my side of the state, it's not very competitive. This is what I hear from my constituents, as far as that are clients of this system and clients of KDADS. Of course, there's a facility in Phillipsburg, and so I hear a lot of ancillary, but as well as a lot of firsthand stuff. And it seems like, is there anything we can do moving forward to make these bids more competitive? And as we look at, some others have said, beyond simply what is the least expensive?
Well, we want to make sure we're encouraging a competitive environment when different types of services come up for bid. I don't know that I have the answers on building capacity in every community for an organization that would have capacity to bid on an array of services. We want them to be sound, meaningful, community-based. But I apologize. I don't know that I have an answer on how to build capacity.
And I understand that, and I'm not necessarily looking for an answer today. But as this morning has gone on, I want maybe something to think about. Sometimes, you know, it seems like we focus so much on the metros on this side of the state. And again, not to be territorial, but people that elect me are from my area. And that's what I'm most familiar with. And so that's where I guess, I'm supportive of a lot of these programs. I think they are doing good things, and we can talk about things offline. But that's where, as we move forward, knowing that the volatility of this situation, that we don't want to have a situation, say, that happened in Nebraska. And again, not to go in deeper, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And we'll make sure we get the full outcomes report that'll show all foster care, all family preservation and foster care outcomes by catchment area, and be happy to talk to you about it. There are a lot of really strong performances in foster care out west, as well as prevention. So maybe when we can get that outcome report by catchment area, folks can have a greater context of the success.
For a second time, Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for the second time. I went back to this computer system. It looks like to me that it's been since 2019, and it's supposed to end in 22. In 7 of 22 is when it's saying, in that I'm looking at the report that we get from JCIT, and it says the public consulting group has already been selected as the vendor. Is that for just the planning, or is that?
Yes, Public Consulting Group is the selected vendor for the feasibility study, the phase of the feasibility study. So the feasibility study ends this year, and as I mentioned, then the next phase after feasibility study is to present an RFP.
Okay, so the feasibility study is a little over $2 million is what we put in for that. Okay. All right, well, that answers a few of my questions then, but I still would like to have a little more information on it. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, I'm not seeing any other representatives that have any more questions, but thank you for being here, Ms. Keys, and giving us an update in regards to foster care and also Families First. Obviously, we have progressed in the last few years in regards to those items, especially foster care, but there is still more work that needs to be done. So thank you for being here. Committee, that's all that we have for today. If you look at the agenda for tomorrow, it's going to be a discussion with the Department of Labor on the Unemployment Trust Fund. So we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We're adjourned.